So example A is an application from calculus. We're just using the sum and difference formula. And so if you wanted to try it out, it's something good to try out. Looking at here, we want to verify this identity, sine of x plus h minus sine of x all over h equals cosine of x times sine of h over h minus sine of x times 1 minus cosine of h over h. And so looking at what we did in this section, we're really looking at the sum formula for sine of x plus h. So let's do that first of all. So that is the sine of x times cosine of h plus cosine of x sine of h minus the rest, sine of x over h. So what we're going to do is we want to regroup these. And so looking here, I have sine of x, cosine of h, cosine of x, sine of h, and a minus sine of x. So what I can do is I want to put the sine of x's close together. So I'm going to rewrite this. I'm going to move this to the front. So this is going to be cosine of x, sine of h. Then I'm going to write this in this here. So that'll be plus sine of x cosine of h minus sine of x all over h. So what I can do is I can factor out a sine from this back. Now looking here at what I'm verifying, I actually want to factor out a negative sine of x. So this kind of helps me out. So let's write cosine of x sine of h. Then I'm going to factor out a negative sine of x. So this becomes a negative cosine of h and then plus 1. So let me rewrite that instead of it that way. I'm going to write 1 minus cosine of h. So I just flipped it. And that's all over h. So if you notice, it's looking really close to what we have above here. So we just need to split up the fraction. So we're going to split it up. So notice this first part, you take out the cosine of x or factor it, put it on the outside. Then you just group together the sine of h over h. Then this is minus sine of x, and then you group this and this together. So 1 minus cosine of h over h, and now it's verified. So try this example. Verify that cosine of x plus h minus cosine of x all over h is what this is on the right. So working this out, I'll go ahead and work this out. So we have cosine of x times cosine of h, and then minus sine of x, sine of h, minus cosine of x all over h. So it's the same thing. We want to group together our cosine of x's, so I'm going to move it. Cosine of x, cosine of h, minus cosine of x. Then I put this rest, negative sine of x, sine of h all over h. So in the front, we're going to go ahead and factor a cosine of x out. We're left with cosine of h minus 1, and then the rest minus sine of x, sine of h, all over h. Then we split up the fraction like we did before. So cosine of x times cosine of h minus 1, and that's all over h. And then minus sine of x times sine of h over h. And now that is verified. Next, I just want to take a look at some homework problems. Homework number 36. Now, you probably have the odds of either 35 or 37. And you see something like this. Cosine of pi over 16 times cosine of 3 pi over 16 minus sine of pi over 16 times sine of 3 pi over 16. Now, at first, you're probably like, what do I do with that? But if you look a little closer, it kind of gives you a clue of what they use. They use the cosine sum formula. So they really used cosine of u plus v. So we know because the cosine is grouped together, so we know that's cosine. The sign is negative, and we know for the formula that it's opposite. It's positive in here. So knowing it's cosine of u plus v, here is u, here is v, and so let's write that. We can write cosine of pi over 16 plus 3 pi over 16. And then just simplify that. That's cosine of 4 pi over 16. Or that becomes cosine of pi over 4. And then what is cosine of pi over 4? Cosine of pi over 4 is here, which is root 2 over 2. So that's how you do those types of problems. Now for number 45, That is secant of V minus U. Now it looks very familiar. Now we don't have secant, but we do have what? We have cosine of V minus U, or U minus V, right? The variables doesn't really matter. So what you can do with this is we know that secant of theta is really 1 over cosine of theta. So how you would start to work out this problem is you do 1 over cosine of V minus U, and then you use the formula. So therefore it's cosine of V cosine of U plus sine of V sine of U. Then you finish solving it that way. Now, of course, you can just flip it at the end or flip it at this point. It's up to you, but that's how you would go about this problem. I hope this helps.